how to do manhood. When I was a young boy growing up in upstate New York, if you knew anything about the streets, you had to be physically present. But with the widespread dissemination of African-American youth popular culture that places such a great emphasis on glorifying the streets and street life, you don't necessarily have to be in the streets to sort of know about the streets in terms of style and values, and certainly someone might check your credentials at a later date and time, but actually you can learn quite a bit about the streets via popular culture as it is disseminated. And so one of the things that's interesting about African American youth popular culture is that the incarceration experience is very much a part of the lyrical and video imagery, especially in gangster rap. And that professor known as 50 Cent, he had a lecture titled 21 Questions. And in that lecture, 21 Questions, he's giving that lecture, and if you've ever seen the video, he's in the prison. And he's on the telephone talking to his girl. And one of the questions that he poses that is relevant to our discussion today is, he says to his girl, if I'm down for a quarter of a century, will you still love me? So he's asking his girl in this video, in his lyric, you know, if I go to prison for 25 years, are you still going to be there for me? And I always try to answer the question for her and say, hell no. Right. But what's important here is this. Where he's situating himself in time and space as a normal space to be for young men like him. The rapper Jadakiss has a song called Why, and he situates himself on the Department of Corrections bus, DOC, chained down on his way to the prison, and he's waxing philosophical. He's doing a Socrates, Plato, Aristotle type of move, you know, around his lyric. He's just asking the question, why? And the lyric that I remember that I really like is kind of not relevant, but it's the one I remember. He says, why did Denzel have to be crooked before he took it? Oh, a rather interesting question. And if you're kind of puzzled by that, it's a reference to when Denzel Washington first received the Oscar. And he didn't receive the Oscar for Hurricane Carter or for Malcolm X, but he received it in Training Day, the film that all black women hate, because he's playing out of character. He's not the good guy you want to take on the mama. He's the guy that you don't want mama to ever meet. You know, he's the corrupt, violent, unfaithful cop. You know, and so in this case, I thought it was rather interesting that Jadakiss is posing these rather philosophical questions, but why does he situate it? Why can't he be at OSU? You know, on the campus, saying why. That's a nice place to ask the question why. You know, but he has to be on the Department of Corrections bus on the way to imprisonment talking about why. And what's a point I'm trying to make here is that the normality, the routineness of incarceration is reflected in African American youth popular culture. And then there's some other ways that you see that as well. You see it in the whole sagging style of dress, which is really prison dress and things, you know. And I always tell my students, I said, when you get home, reverse the spelling of sagging. You know, and if you reverse the spelling, it spells niggas, which is rather interesting as well. There are a number of challenges that are associated with maintaining relationships when individuals are incarcerated. Some of the research suggests that the average prisoner in the United States is incarcerated more than 100 miles from his home. You know that many of these people are from lower and working class backgrounds, and traveling to these rural and remote communities can be very challenging, where there is no public transportation, and just very difficult to make those visits. The prison visits themselves can be difficult and challenging, especially the security procedures, even going through the diapers of babies and things. And I think it is necessary, because there are some people who want to sort of try to play on and get past the security procedures as a way of bringing in various sorts of contraband, but it can make it difficult for some people who don't want to subject themselves to that, and therefore reduce the number of visits that a person can possibly have, no contact during visits. So just the whole visitation piece, the high cost of telephone calls to prisons makes it very difficult. Some people have to impose blocks on their telephones because they endured these high charges by virtue of their relatives calling them, etc. The erosion of family life. One of the consequences of the high rates of incarceration among African Americans in particular is that I argue that it is one of the factors among a number that is contributing to the shortage of marriageable males. You know, men who have high rates of, in a community where men have a high rate of incarceration, it's going to create an imbalance in terms of desirable and marriageable males, and that's going to also have impact with regard to family life, the supervision of children. Just an erosion of family life is another consequence of incarceration. So the question I pose, unlike Jadakiss, why did Denzel have to be crooked before he took it? My question is a little bit more academic and relevant to our time here today. Why discuss prisoner reentry? And one of the reasons that we should be concerned about prisoner reentry is that each year in this country, upwards of 650,000 individuals are returning from prison to the community. As a matter of fact, some of the more recent statistics from the Justice Department indicates that in 2007 it was 725,000 individuals who returned. But in most of the reentry literature, we're using this figure of 650,000. 650,000 individuals returning from state and federal prisons each year, making the transition back into the community. That's one reason why we should be concerned about prisoner reentry. But another thing we should be concerned about is the finding that within 3 years, 2/3 of individuals return to prison as a consequence of either a parole violation and or a new criminal charge. So, you know, we're not very successful in deterring individuals from engaging in behaviors that lead to incarceration when 2/3 go back within the 3-year period of time. And then what's problematic is the cost. We're paying this huge amount of money to deal with corrections. And no wonder in 2001, President Bush the Jr. encouraged the Congress of the United States to enact legislation to help the states begin to address prisoner reentry. It wasn't because President Bush was, had a moment of compassion. It was because President Bush realized, hey, we're doing something wrong here. We're spending a lot of money on corrections, and we're not getting any benefit. And so in 2001, the Congress enacted legislation, provided the states with $2 million each to begin some comprehensive planning. And I'm happy to be in Ohio today because I regard the Ohio Prisoner Reentry Plan as a model for the nation. It's a plan that was developed by your former Commissioner Reggie Wilkerson. And it's an excellent and very comprehensive plan that talks about the need for reentry planning on day one of an individual's incarceration, especially those who are going to inevitably return back to the community. Just one other point I want to make about the cost of incarceration. There's some states now, California and New York, that are spending more on corrections than they are on public higher education. That is, they're spending more on their correctional institutions than they are on the state colleges and universities that the state funds. Another challenge with reentry is that most prisoners in every state are returning to a cluster of neighborhoods, to a limited number of zip codes. So there's a high rate of removal from particular neighborhoods, and there's a high rate of return to those same neighborhoods.